Should we worry about VO2 max? If you listen to any of the podcast or health and fitness influencers, they tell you VO2 max and longevity, that's where it's at. In the world of endurance sport, we say, hey, VO2 max, if you want to reach your best performance, we can all quote the highest VO2 maxes, the Bjorn Dollies, the Steve Prefontaines. But does it really matter? That's what we're going to slice and dice apart, looking at the science and a little bit of practicality as well. So I want to start with what it is. So I'm going to keep this really simple, although we'll go deep on the science. It's simply VO2 max is maximum oxygen consumption. So it's oxygen you take in versus oxygen you breathe out. Now, we could break this down by looking at every step of the equation, from breathing the oxygen in, going through your lungs, to getting transferred into the bloodstream, to getting pumped all the way to your muscles, and then utilized in your muscles, and then byproducts pumped back out, and how much is used versus not used. We can get really complicated. I outline it all in my book, Science of Running. If you want to learn more, go there. But I want to keep focused on the main thing here. And that's, does it matter functionally and practically to you? So I want to start with the longevity piece, and then we'll go into the sport piece. So if you go around the interwebs, what you'll see is everybody says VO2 max and longevity. It's one of the best predictors. There's some truth to that. In actuality, it's a really good predictor of longevity. Then what's my problem with it? If you look at the research, we're complicating things. So the vast majority of research in the reviews that I've looked at longevity or morbidity and VO2 max have actually used it as a surrogate marker for cardiorespiratory fitness. What do I mean by that? The majority of them don't look at the VO2 max number and compare that to longevity. They look at how fast did you get on the VO2 max test before you essentially cried uncle. So it's a performance thing. And they look at that performance measure as the marker of cardiorespiratory fitness. So stepping back a little bit, if we do a VO2 max test, what do? We get on a bike or a treadmill, and they increase some combination of the speed or the incline or resistance until essentially you're fatigued and done. And what I'm saying is the vast majority of the research in the longevity space doesn't tie the actual VO2 max number to longevity. It ties something simpler, which is the speed or treadmill speed, bike speed, or combination with incline you are at when you say, I've had enough, I can't go any further. So what this means is that, yes, it's important to longevity, but it's not entirely VO2 max itself. And in fact, it's far simpler. It's your performance on some sort of aerobic-based test. We know VO2 max tests generally take, again, there's some range, but generally 10 to 12 minutes to finish. So it's the equivalent of a high-level runner running a 2-mile or a little further. Maybe a low-level runner running a mile or a little further, or 2K or something like that, or the equivalent in cycling. In fact, according to research, your probably best bet for seeing where you fall in the longevity, health, etc. world is by doing a performance test. The number itself doesn't do any better than performance. In fact, probably worse for the reasons we'll get into. Okay, so from the longevity, that's what the research says. The VO2 max, sure, it correlates, but you know what correlates better and is used more frequently? Your performance in an aerobic test. Simple. That's what matters. Why does that tend to work better? Because it gets holistically. VO2 max is one component of aerobic fitness or aerobic performance, but doesn't it make sense that the thing that correlates best to longevity is holistic aerobic performance or holistic performance, which includes anaerobic? Of course it does. Okay, so go run a mile at the track. That'll give you more information. All right. So let's get into why VO2 max and performance might be a struggle as well. So first off, there's some problems with the testing methods. So traditionally, and we're going in the weeds a little bit, way back in the 1920s, A.V. Hill, godfather of exercise physiology, comes up with VO2 max with his partner and colleagues. And essentially what they find is that when they measure VO2 and they're increasing speed, at some point, they're able to keep going faster. VO2 has plateaued, and that would be your max. So you're able to go a little bit faster, but your VO2 doesn't go up any. Your oxygen consumption plateaus. That was Hill's original thesis. That's why they called it maximum oxygen consumption. You hit a point where you're still increasing the demands by running faster and faster, but oxygen consumption plateaus. But here's the problem. In modern research, we don't see that plateau with everybody. In fact, it's somewhat rare to get a plateau. And there was a study that looked at world-class elite cyclists and found that, I believe it was 47% didn't have a plateau. Now, I found this kind of funny because in the research, some of the researchers said maybe they weren't motivated. These are world-class cyclists, buddy. Like, you put them on an exercise test to see their VO2 max, they're going to go. This isn't Joe the jogger. So anyways, it's not just that study. It's a wide phenomenon. We don't have a plateau. The other thing that we notice in testing for VO2 max is that the test matters. So if I put you on a ski erg versus a treadmill versus a bike, your VO2 max is going to be different. Now, some of that makes sense, right? Changing oxygen demands at the muscular level might impact things centrally, but it tells us that VO2 max isn't just a central thing, it's central and peripheral. But even the way that we test on the same apparatus can shift our VO2 max. If you, for example, if you do a test where you don't increase the incline, you just increase the speed. If you change the amount of speed increases that you have or the time limit of them. So going from instead of increase every 3 minutes to increase every 2 minutes, that can change it. Or my favorite is when you give control to the individual, meaning instead of the scientist increasing the speed every 3 minutes, the athlete gets to decide, hey, I want to exhaust myself in 10 minutes. How am I going to do that? In fact, I ran a little study on my college team doing this. And what we found is the high-level runners reached a significantly higher VO2 max when they were given control than when it was me deciding how much and when they increased the speed. About that for me. What that means is the VO2 max number, like almost all performance things, is variable. What that means to us is that as a holistic thing, it's not this singular godlike number that defines things. Okay? So keep that in mind. Second, should we train to improve the thing? Should we focus, like some podcasters, influencers tell us, to increase our VO2 max because it's tied to longevity? We already dismantled that. You're probably better training for the mile or 2 mile or whatever have you, which we'll get into why that might be the case. Let's look at the facts there. So there's some wonderful research that has come out that has shown that in well-trained athletes, VO2 max tends to not improve much, if at all. There's a wonderful case study on Paula Radcliffe, the former marathon world record holder, where they followed her for years. And VO2 max was essentially plateaued from, off the top of my head, from her late teens into her professional career, to her 30s. No improvement. No significant change. Yet her performance improved a lot. Her performance improved drastically. And that's often what it's not just with Radcliffe, but what is in well-trained athletes. We hit a point where our VO2 max stays relatively stable, but our performance keeps going because of other things like lactate threshold, running economy, and a whole bunch of other slew of impactors that impact performance, speed, etc. But it's not just, okay, in well-trained athletes it plateaus. If you look at research as well, what tends to happen in untrained individuals is you have a fast increase in VO2 max, and then it stagnates. Performance keeps improving. Performance keeps going up, but VO2 max stagnates. And this makes sense if you understand that, again, VO2 max isn't the entirety of cardiorespiratory fitness, aerobic performance, whatever we want to call it. So my point is, if we're aiming to train it, unless you're a novice, why? It largely takes care of itself if you're doing good training for performance. Getting faster at a 5K or 10K or a marathon or a mile or whatever, 800, whatever happens. Your VO2 max, especially going from novice to, intermediate runner or especially well-trained runner, it'll increase, then it'll plateau and barely change. But your performance keeps improving. And we know that performance is the thing that ties to longevity. So why would we care about our VO2 max? And I think the last part on this is that performance is easier to measure. It keeps improving. It doesn't stagnate. So why wouldn't we just aim for that? Why wouldn't we tell people, hey, if you care about your health and longevity, go run a faster mile. Get faster for the 5K. I already outlined why well-trained athletes shouldn't probably pay attention to it. Because it's not going to budge much. But everything else contributing to performance will. It's more trainable over the long haul. And the second part is, why not train for it? Why not do what all these protocol people tell you to do and say, here's my protocol to increase VO2 max? Because it focuses narrowly on a number that, again, is harder to train, that tends to stagnate, and doesn't reflect holistic aerobic performance. What tends to happen is and you can look at the advice. If you see podcasters, protocol people tell you train for VO2 max, what do they tell you? They tell you the best workout. Go do the Norwegian 4x4 minutes and repeat that all the time. Or someone else, go do Tabata sprints, which we had a video on, tearing it apart. The problem is all of those studies around those things are short-term interventions, and often novices, maybe intermediate, but often novice athletes. And I'm not concerned about, hey, can you increase your VO2 max in 4 to 6 weeks? We're talking performance. I'm looking at a whole season or year or multiple years. If I'm talking longevity, I'm looking at a life. I don't care if 4x4 minutes gives me the best boost in 4 weeks compared to other training. The point is, when we say, hey, here's how to train to improve VO2 max, we often narrow on that VO2 max zone. We look at things that are around mile, 3K, 5K pace, depending on the athlete, because that's our VO2 max zone. In order to improve our VO2 max, we have to stay in that zone all the time. Maybe you get someone a little more educated and they say, hey, I'm going to combine zone 2 with the VO2 max work, and this is the optimal protocol. That's not correct, because maybe narrowly for increases in VO2 max, but hopefully I've made the case that doesn't really matter. What we care about is performance. And if we look at performance, we understand as a coach, as an athlete, as a scientist, that we need the whole range of intensity. We need easy runs, recovery runs, we need steady runs, we need threshold training, we need tempo runs, we need 10K pace, 5K pace, 3K pace, VO2 max. We need faster stuff. We need tolerance work. We need mile pace. We need 800 pace. We need hill sprint. Because when you care about running faster over 5K or a mile or 800, choose your event. I don't care what it is. As long as it has a decent aerobic component, which everything 800 up does, it's going to be tied to health and longevity, or choose whatever you care about performing at. But we know that if performance correlates best, and instead of narrowly focusing on here's how to increase your VO2 max, which again, studies show, there was a wonderful study that was 36 weeks long a couple decades ago, but a really good study, which found, yeah, they improved their VO2 max in the first 12 weeks, but then it stagnated for a while. Performance kept improving. So again, even in longer term studies, when you look at this approach, VO2 max stagnate. And we're talking, just to be clear, VO2 max measured, not the little thing on your watch that says, this is your VO2 max. No, that's just an algorithm that gives you a performance indicator. It's not a VO2 max. It's closer to performance because the inputs are your pace, speed, heart rate, etc. at different things. So it's giving you performance. Okay. So what? The point is this. It's not that VO2 max doesn't matter. It's a big contributor to aerobic performance. But what we know is that it tends to stagnate, especially in well-trained athletes. How we test changes it significantly. I'll tell you, my data, depending on the protocol, at similar level of fitnesses, I've been anywhere from 67 to 76, just by changing the protocol. Even lower, actually, if I include my one on a bike. On the bike, I was horrible. Okay. So the point is, it's probably not that good of a measure in terms of that a recreational, even advanced athlete needs to know. Because it's probably going to stagnate. That doesn't mean it's not important. It just means when you look at the breadth of performance, everything else from lactate threshold to tolerance to speed, endurance, to speed capacity, to running economy, all of those change and are more amenable to change over the long haul, meaning for years and years, versus VO2 max. So I'm begging. VO2 max sounds great. It sounds awesome to say, hey, here's this number attached to my name. I can tell you, hey, I had a VO2 max of 76, which is wonderful. But I also had people with VO2 maxes higher than me that were significantly slower than me that we tested. Why? Because of the last factor that I'm going to tell you. When you look at elite athletes and you lined them all up and you said, hey, give me everybody's VO2 max above 70 or whatever have you, I could not tell you who was going to win the race. The person who has a 90 VO2 max could be beat by the person with a 72. Because it loses its predictive ability once you're essentially in the club. Now, is a 75 VO2 max going to beat a 50? Yeah. But once you're in the club of pretty dang high 60s or above, it loses its predictive ability for performance. It's not correlated at all to performance, really, in that zone of people. Why? Because of everything we talked about. It increases, and then it stagnates. The other things keep going. I just want to be clear. People hear that and they're like, oh, of course, everyone's elite, etc. No, like we're talking pretty good high school kids will be in that club of 60 something plus. And it can't distinguish, between them and someone else with a high VO2 max. So anyways, I'm on my soapbox. I'll stop. If you enjoy breakdowns of the science of performance, subscribe. Also, check out my latest books, Do Hard Things, Win the Inside Game is my latest, is Win the Inside Game. You'll really enjoy it. Got all sorts of bonuses. Check out the links. And thanks for listening, and leave some comments on what you want me to cover, because happy to dismantle all sorts of ideas in the performance world and tell you what actually matters.